Hi, everyone. It's Eastern Europe, Belarus. I am Ula. I'm a researcher and artist.
And I am Viktsya. I am also an artist and an author myself, being a co-host of this wonderful podcast. And today's episode is dedicated to one of my most favorite periods in all of the times, also known as the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. But before starting to talk about it, I think that it is important to give a quick footnote about the abbreviations we're going to use. I feel that we're going to use them in this episode. And the first one is GDL.
GDL is my favorite three letters. And actually, I feel like, the Dark Ages narrative of something dark is extremely interesting and how they're framed. And I feel like GDL should be understood as a Grand Duchy of Lithuania is also this constructed idea, because in Belarusian schools, at least, we're taught that Grand Duchy of Lithuania was this melting pot. As I don't know, Americans have the idea of melting pot as in the United States. We have an idea of melting pot as Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was the paradise where all the nations came together and they were so peaceful. It's actually very interesting because in Lithuania, a lot of times it's viewed as conquer idea of different tribes that lived by the sea, and then they conquered the Rus. But we view this as a commonwealth, as we did it all together. And basically it's this medieval state that started to form in 13th century, soon got the Rus territories, and so much integrated them that the statute, a constitution in a way, medieval constitution, was printed in this Ruthenian language. But at some point in 16th century, also this Grand Duchy of Lithuania had a commonwealth with Poland.
Yeah, thank you so much for this explanation. A few comments on this. Actually, the Belarusian region is very interesting in this respect because we could use the documents of medieval ancient Kievan Rus and Great Duchy of Lithuania, GDL, and also Polish documents later to talk about Belarusian Middle Ages, because it was the region in between, and in this sense really a melting pot. The historiography of the region is really complicated because always there are disputes, and sometimes there are actually aggressive about the true descendants of this historical past and heritage. But we are not talking about this today. I think that we are going to be primarily focused on the queer history. And I think that the problem was very clearly stated in one great essay called Kings as Queens by two Polish researchers, Robert Kuszek and Wojciech Szymański, which said that Polish historiography, which might well be seen as representative of Central and Eastern European historical writing in general, remains a prime example of the absence of a queer historical impulse. And I think that this is true, and this is one of the main problems about queer research in the Middle Ages, is that the historiography, the history itself is homophobic, but also then the historiography adds the second layer. So basically the historians who study Middle Ages add the second layer of homophobia to the sources.
I mean, we talked on the first episode about how all of this is new, and all of this approach that views people as the actors of a story, as different identities that could be studied and could be not just without moral compass evaluated, but just researched as piece. But I'm actually interested in how are the knowledge of this queer people, how does it stay even? How do we have it from that time?
This is a wonderful question, because how do we actually know about the sexuality of the people in the Middle Ages? Because we we know so little about them. So it's like even harder to know with whom they slept or about anything about their sexual identity. But I think I wanted to start with the proclamation about what sexuality was in the Middle Ages, because I think that this is important to note that, first of all, it was directly connected to the morals, but at the same time, it was not stigmatized as we could imagine, for example, it was in the society of the Victorian era in the 19th century, or maybe in contemporary Poland. People were talking about sexuality, but in rather different ways. The immediately appearing inevitable problem is with the sources. How did the people speak about themselves? And well, they didn't in the sense of the word interview, quote unquote, as how we could understand it today. We definitely have different genres, as for example, dialogues, which are actually very close to the above mentioned interviews, stories, court trial records, and very different other genres of texts covering the topics of sexuality. But we should bear in mind that most of the surviving texts were written by clergymen, and even more often within the monasteries. So they were heavily influenced by church. So when we're talking about the Western or Eastern European sexuality and the written sources depicting it, we should definitely bear in mind that it's going to be through the church's lens in most of the cases. Secondly, the medieval texts were functioning not exactly how we are used to them today, as the history charts, even if they were supposed to be, even if we want them to be objectively true, they could have contained some allegories or Bible allusions, or the scribe just had the desire to make the text more morally instructive, and he just put these morals into the historical text. And I'm gonna give some examples actually connected, which would be connected directly to sexuality. Yeah.
So as I understand, like the medieval society is the time when the organized religion in the area started to play such a major role that it could be institutionalized. And this is like the first time that we have like these big churches all around, and all of this infrastructure of the organized like religions. And when I think about like how person could think about stuff like this, is the words that they might use in order to describe the type of behavior that is around them, and how was that like as well like influencing the idea of sexuality? Because as again, like Christianity is, for example, very much opposing to the idea of like sexual, and it has like a lot of restrictions about sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a great question. I think directly related to the question which words actually literally, which words they were using to describe, for example, queer people. How do we know that the people we're reading about were actually queer? Because of course, the monks in the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th and so on centuries didn't use the words gay, queer, or something like this. What it could be actually, this is one of my favorite parts of searching through the medieval texts. So first of all, the gay person could be classified as the sodomite. So the one who is sinning against nature. Or homosexuality could be described as luxuria, which is in Latin means the deadly sin of lust or lechery.
And I feel like that notion, especially luxuria, because it looks like luxury, should be queered and should be embraced as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. I also think so. But also, I mean, the sinning against nature could not be referred only to homosexuality, because it could describe actually the sexual connections to the animals, or sex within the heteronormative couples, but excluding procreation. This was also sinning against nature through the church optics. I think we should tell the story about the myth of Sodom, which was mentioned also in the Bible, where the two travelers came to the Lot's house, and the people of Sodom, their city, just came to this house right after that and asked to get to know, literally, those travelers. And this verb know, most likely, or at least in the Middle Ages, was interpreted as something related to sexual connotations. But Lot didn't allow the citizens to know or to fuck the travelers. I'm sorry. And instead of it, he offered his own daughters, which in their case didn't know the man before. So from this episode, what we actually could know ourselves, that the citizens of Sodom were at least bisexual.
Maybe they were not for consensual intercourses, but they were bisexual.
Yeah, exactly. And also, but there are so many connotations to this verb to know. And the thing is that from now on, the sodomites were also described as people have an enormous sexual desire, for example, or something perversive, obviously from the point of view of the church.
The question for me is how much those ideas that were also implemented in Christianity were actually affecting GDL. How much this norms, this morals influence the rulers or the, I don't know, how it all affected.
I think that I can think primarily about the example of the Lithuanian Crusades, because within the GDL, the Belarusian lands were primarily Christian, but the Lithuanian in contemporary sense of the words, Lithuanian lands were pagan. So the Teuton Ord were organized the crusades against the Lithuanian to actually baptize them, or basically just to rob them and conquer them, etc., etc. And in the Latin proclamations of the church, because the church actually was the main organizer of the crusades, there could be found accusations of sodomity. But the problem is that we don't actually know. Of course, it didn't mean probably that all Lithuanian people were gay.
But at least that there was some kind of practice.
Yeah, I mean, this is the example I mentioned earlier. This is the problem that almost all of the references are directly connected to morals. And for example, if we want to remember one of the Polish kings, Władysław III, Vladislav III, and his military failure and death at the Battle of Varna in 1444. This was described as a direct result of his male lust and lewd and despicable habits. So basically, he was gay, and that's why he lost in a battle.
So, as I understand, queerness is viewed as a moral category that could not only justify certain actions against some kind of groups because they're immoral or they're sodomite or people from Sodom, but also it could be the way to make a propaganda, view the actions of the ruler. Oh, that's because he's gay or something.
Exactly. And this was just the part of the rhetorics, the part of the discourse, actually, if you wanted to accuse someone of something. And it is very interesting to look at the other traditions when we are talking about it. Because, for example, in the Icelandic legal tradition, in the Scandinavian legal tradition, I would say, one of the heaviest accusations, which was actually punished by law, is to call someone ragr. And this adjective basically meant being sexually passive and could be used only towards men.
And we should not forget that Rus and the rulers of Rus are coming from Scandinavia, and probably the ethics that they acquired through this set of laws as well, or this set of mindset, could have been as well popular later around different duchies of the country.
That's a matter of speculation, to be honest, because we don't have direct evidences. But also, I think this is very important to have this queer impulse and actually to speculate, because I really like, for example, the idea of finding homoerotic elements in the troubadour's poetry, or, for example, the scholar Gabriel Bychowski offered an interpretation of the 14th Middle English tale about Narcissus as a trans suicide story in her essays, The Necropolitics of Narcissus. But, however, we know the real examples also. We know that in a lot of laws and law codexes around Europe, the cross-dressing was punished by law, which basically means that there were people who were doing this. But of course, let's bear in mind that anyway, if we're talking about the past, about the people whom we cannot meet and ask directly, we're talking about constructive and discursive sexuality, because it is literally impossible to define a real sexual identity of someone who died 1,000 years ago.
But could you please elaborate on that? How does this approach work? I understand that we can't know their sexuality, or, for example, we know of this legislative trait that someone said that he could be sodomite, but it doesn't mean that he was actually queer. But what do you mean by the idea that we view sexuality and, for example, trans identity today is very, very much different than it was before, or that those people that didn't have to feel like they're not in their gender to be cross-dressing? Or
I feel that this is coming from my actually feminist ethics, which is so fun to observe, that I think that I don't have all the rights to speak on behalf of those people. And when I don't have the opportunity actually to sit in front of them and ask them, oh, were you gay? Because they didn't have even the word for this, would be not correct. That's why I'm having all those footnotes and so on and so on. I really like the interpretations, and of course, and we have the quote-unquote real historical evidences of homosexuality in the Middle Ages, of course.
Yeah, but this is very interesting because as well, in Middle Ages, for me, it's also about the carnival culture. It's about this carnival where everyone is mocking or cross-dressing or have this crazy vibe going in the city. And yeah, I'm curious, what could have that be? And as well, how does this work with cross-dressing laws?
I think that actually what you're referring to is a very famous essay of Mikhail Bakhtin, The Culture of the Carnival, and I don't really remember him being direct about homosexuality. I don't think that he wrote about it, but if we're using just the concept of challenging this status quo with the help of the carnival, then why not? Why can't we imply also the challenge of the sexuality, not only the cross-dressing and gender switch, which obviously was present according to Bakhtin himself, but also this challenging of the rigorous church morals, which was basically heteronormative. It is great that in the last 50 years, I think, people are trying to find the kind of escape to this church morals and trying to find the homosexual evidences within the church itself. And there are actually a lot of them. And there are a lot of psychoanalytical interpretation and so many images, for example, of Jesus being seen as the mother, and this circulating femininities and masculinities. I feel that we only just approached this topic. It's so new, it's so recent, and it has so much potential in we could find like this queering of history. We have so much of the database which was basically overlooked, and the right questions, I think, were not asked. So I encourage everyone to go to their archive in their city where they live and ask the right questions.
But of course, if you're too busy to go to archive today, you can just go to our description where we left some literature that was discussed today and that we recommend. Also, make sure you follow us, you share this episode with your friends, and you also could follow us on Instagram where we have the name Eastern Kyiv. And I also, like, by the end of the episode, wanted to thank like people who are making all of this happen. I want to say that this episode was produced with support from an OST and founded by the Foundation Remembrance, Responsibility and Future, EVZ, and the Federal Ministry of Finance as part of educational agenda on national socialism and justice.
Thank you and bye. I just don't know how to say see you in the third episode.